Hello again everyone. So you know how I said I'd be branching into a few different fandoms? This is the first video of that. Today we'll be hearing what would happen if RWBY and Weiss were childhood friends. Thanks for popping in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into the video. Chapter 1, a prologue worth telling. It started in 3rd grade. She sat in front of the class with all her essential supplies laid out on her desk in a neat order. Pencils arranged by grade, eraser lined properly next to her sharpeners and a single black pen. She smiled to herself, giving a mental pat on the back for her sheer orderliness. After all, success only came after perfection, and Weiss was everything and perfect. All right class. She hears the teacher call out, her eyes landing on her best friend, Blake Belladonna, and as they share a look of inquiry, they both focus on the front. Today is a very special day, we have 2 new classmates. Please come in you two, the older woman called. No sooner than that, there stood 2 girls in front of the class. One was a taller girl, with long, blonde hair tied up into 2 pigtails. She wore a yellow shirt that said Karate Kid in the front and a pair of cargo shorts. Her bright lilac eyes scanned the crowd. Weiss could see how she tightened her fist and had a guarded demeanor, and briefly wondered what could have made a girl her age this angry at everything in the world. The taller girl had an arm around the other girl's shoulder in a protective manner. That made Weiss focus on the shorter one. It could be a mistake, this girl was probably just around 6, way smaller than all of them in the room. She had shoulder-length shiny black hair with red tips, messily scattered around her head. She wore a red shirt with an adorable picture of a puppy in front, black jeans, and comically large sneakers. Somehow, it suited the girl. When she looked up to look at the class, the moment her eyes landed on Weiss, she couldn't help but think, how beautiful, as shiny, silver eyes reflected everything she could see. Gorgeous and yet, sad and even more guarded than her lilac-eyed friend. She didn't know it then, but she wouldn't forget the feeling of something pleasant fluttering in her stomach. Now come on you two, their homeroom teacher urged, introduce yourselves, and the shorter girl just gripped the taller one's shirt. Hi, everyone, the blonde starts, my name is Yang Xiaolong, this is my sister, Ruby Rose, and it's nice to meet you all, she says, trying to keep her tone even. The smaller girl hid behind her sister, closing her eyes. They hear the quiet mumble of the older sister urging the smaller girl to speak up, and she just murmurs a much silent and shaky hello. All right then, I hope you become good friends with each other, Miss Shni, Miss Belladonna, as class representatives I hope you two guide Miss Rose and Miss Xiaolong. That was how it began. She didn't think I'd affect so much, but one day she'd know that those two were different, and they made Weiss and Blake's lives complete. It'll come, just not today. Ruby was despondent, for lack of a better term. Weiss tried her best to get the younger girl to open up, but she only offered tiny, forced smiles. More often than not, she'd spot the girl on the corner of her eyes, hiding in hidden little nooks and crannies, and coming back to sit on her seat, next to Weiss, with tear stains on the corners of her eyes. She didn't want to pry, her older sister taught her better than that, but something just pulled her closer to the younger girl. So that one time she saw Ruby leaving, she followed her to finally confront her about her feelings. She wasn't going to be like her father, she was going to help people. And she decided she would be starting with this girl who was 2 years younger than her. Ruby kept walking and walking until she found herself in the back of the school. Ruby looked around before pulling the chain link fence upward, revealing a small pathway just big enough for a kid. As soon as she crossed the fence, Weiss panicked, wondering where on earth the girl was headed. It wasn't the time for questions though, Ruby might get lost and hurt, so she had to follow the girl even more. Slipping through the fence the same way, she took tentative steps before making her mind up, jogging after the girl. The forest behind the school was, well, creepy, to say the least. It was dark and it felt cool and sticky. It irked her, the only sounds she could hear were the woodland creatures she couldn't see. Then she heard something that gave her goosebumps. In this dark, dank forest, it was sobbing. Quiet sobbing made her look around the area warily. Hello. Weiss asks, but only got a gust of wind as an answer. Gulping, she trudged forward to find her objective, and then she found herself in a clearing. A crystal clear pond with sunlight shining down in random areas through the cracks of foliage above. Amongst the green, she found a head of black and red, crying quietly whilst pulling the grass around her in frustration. Ruby. Her voice was a lot louder than she thought, but in the silence, She supposed it was just natural. Ruby's head looks up and stares at her, eyes glistening in tears. Immediately the girl wipes her eyes furiously and hugs her knees to her face, her shoulders shaking, indicating the amount of feelings she'd been holding off. For a moment all Weiss could do was stare at the small figure, but now wasn't the time for looking. She needed action. So she took the first step. "Ruby, may I sit beside you?" For a while the younger girl didn't respond, but when she bobbed her head up and down once, Weiss smiled and sat down beside her. The girl didn't speak, still hugging herself, eyes closed as if fending the demons that haunted her reality. When she found her courage to speak, Weiss asked, "You don't have to tell me, but it can't be good for you to keep bottling up like this. So, could you tell me what's wrong?" Every word spoken carefully to not make the younger girl more stressed. It was a long time before Ruby spoke up. Blue and Silver met before Ruby looked down. "My mom," the girl began before erupting in another bout of tears. Weiss didn't even know when she'd pulled the girl closer in a half embrace, rubbing the girl's back to soothe her. Mom." Ruby's erratic breathing was worrying Weiss, but she just kept trying to calm her down. "My mom's gone," she said. It was broken, it was resigned to sorrow, and Weiss understood everything now. So she did the only thing she could do, as her grandfather once taught her. Hugs are the best medicine for the saddest of people. So she hugged Ruby so tight, letting the girl cry everything out. It felt like a long time before Ruby's tears dried out. Grabbing a handkerchief from her pocket, she wiped all the liquids from the younger girl's face until only the occasional hicks were heard. "Do you feel a bit better?" she questions, rubbing the girl's shoulder, and Ruby nods. "A bit," she stuttered. "Why are you being so nice to me?" "Because I lost someone important to me too once, and I know how bad it felt to be alone. I just didn't want you to feel the same. I come here when I feel like crying," Ruby starts, pulling away from Weiss' arms to hug herself again. "I don't want Dad to worry again. He's not doing well since the funeral, and Yang's trying to be strong for me and Dad, and I just don't want to be a burden anymore. I don't want her to know I keep crying day and night because she'd be sad again. I don't want her to cry cause I know how hard she's trying to be there for us, so I come here, to be alone so Yang doesn't have to feel bad about me being a crybaby." "SHH, you're not a crybaby, and anyone who says so, they're going to hear a lot of bad things from me." Weiss placed her hands on her waist. "I promise you that." This put a small smile on the girl's face. "You sound just like Yang." She gives her a reassuring smile before extending a hand for the girl to take. It didn't take long for Ruby to follow her lead, and she stood up feeling much better than earlier. Their walk back was filled with small talk, Weiss trying to keep Ruby from spiraling and asking her questions like her favorite color, red, her favorite food, cookies, her current hobbies, computers, tech, and video games, why she was the same grade as them despite getting younger. She was bumped up 2 grades for having exceptional results in her exam papers. They took a lot longer walking back. As soon as they saw the familiar chain link fence, Weiss considered hiding her and Ruby when they saw 2 figures looking around. "Rubes, where are you?" a frantic voice asked, and they found the blonde girl, Ruby's sister, looking around alongside her best friend, Blake, eyes widening when they saw them beyond the fence. "Yang." Ruby waved, and the taller girl wasted no time scaling the fence, jumping to the other side and hugging her sister tightly. "I was so worried, you didn't come back after break." And then Yang held Ruby's face, inspecting it thoroughly before wiping the tear marks around her cheeks. "Have you been crying?" Her lilac eyes turned darker as she faced Weiss. "Did you make my little sister cry?" "What?" "Yang, no." Ruby pulls away and stands in front of her. "Weiss didn't do anything, she followed me because she was worried about me." "I was crying about Mom," she said meekly, and Yang's face flashed in pain. "Oh." The air grew tense around them. So Ruby was the one who broke it. "It's been rough, and I know you're trying to help us, but I just didn't want to be more of a burden to you, so I can't always be the one relying on you. I want you to rely on me too. Rubes, you'd never be a burden to me, remember? It's you and me and against the world, especially now more than ever, so don't ever run away from me again, alright? I'll share your pain and you'll share mine." Apparently that was the right answer, because the youngest girl tackled her big sister in a tight hug. As they pulled apart, Ruby tugged the bottom of her sister's shirt and pointed her head in Weiss' direction, and Yang looked confused for the most part until it hit her. Weiss smirked smugly at the blonde and crossed her arms haughtily. "Well, I'm waiting," she said. That made the taller girl's eye twitch, but Ruby's incessant tugging made the girl break. "Fine. I'm sorry for blaming you without knowing. Are you happy? Has anyone told you that you're obnoxious?" Weiss says pointedly. "I have a feeling you and I aren't going to get along well, Ice Queen," the blonde snarks back. "Why, how dare you?" But they were both cut off by the quiet girl who, for the first time, partook in a conversation where she had to close her book. "I appreciate you two's budding romance, but we better go. You two go flirt later, classes are still in session," Blake says before turning back. Ruby followed and made conversation with the black-haired girl. They could faintly hear talks about books and Blake cracking small jokes that had Ruby giggling, being far more happy than the rest of the day had been, and they stared at the odd pair confused. Did they just ditch us? Did Ruby really just ditch me? Her favorite sister? Yang asked the sky in disbelief. "I can't believe Blake would just leave me with you of all people." "Me? Think about how I feel you." And their bickering extended all the way until the end of classes. That was how their group was formed. A hot-headed blonde, a genius dork 2 years younger, an ice princess and a literary ninja. The next 2 years had been a blur. They were in 5th grade now, and despite not being compatible personality-wise, the four of them became the best of friends. Yang was, as always, the head of trouble. Every single bad idea in the book, from poking a hornet's nest to holding a thick slab of ham while skateboarding past a group of hound dogs, she did it. Ruby, on the other hand, followed her older sister's footsteps, much to Weiss' chagrin. Using her genius to create various things, usually for mayhem, like a mini pizza launcher that started a big food fight in the cafeteria, or deliberately mixing the wrong chemicals to find out what it does, making the room be covered by smoke and the girl in soot and ash. Blake, surprisingly, was just as chaotic as the two, often letting herself be swept in the chaos, all while laughing at the sisters' antics. So in the end, putting out the fires and fixing problems became Weiss' de facto job. As is getting mad at the troublesome trio and getting mad. Well, trying to be mad anyway. It was difficult to look annoyed when Yang carried Ruby to her like a puppy, and Ruby gave Weiss the cutest pout and went, "Please, Weiss, don't be mad. I love you." If she didn't know what it felt like to have Cupid's arrow shoot at her heart, well, she sure figured it out rather quickly. This was the year girls started crushing on boys, but her and Blake? Well, they were in for a tough surprise when they found out they were both smitten by one of the Xiaolongrose sisters each. Blake, making googly eyes at Yang and Weiss, was, well, she was a sucker for those silver doe eyes, innocent demeanor, and overall lovable personality. The moment she and Blake realized, they looked at each other in horror and kept their mouths shut, swearing to keep their secrets and not let the sisters know yet. It was peaceful and every day was fun. But as always, change comes in and hits you as fast as a bullet. It started as a regular day at school, but the moment it ended, Ruby and Yang were picked up by an unfamiliar man, someone Weiss and Blake had never even met before. Somehow, she felt something horrible stirring up the pits of her stomach. He had dark hair, wearing a worn-out gray and black suit. His pale red eyes looked so crestfallen when they saw the girls. "Uncle Crow." Ruby runs for the man, and he bent down and gave the younger girl a tight hug. When he didn't let go, Ruby asked innocently as she patted his back, "Hey, Uncle Crow, what's wrong?" Her bad feeling came true. The next funeral was held with a small number of people. Her and Blake, alongside their families, Mom, Whitley, Winter, and Klein, attended on her side. Gyra and Kali attended with Blake alongside their only family left, that scruffy old guy named Crow. It was a beautiful spring afternoon as they buried Taeyang Xiaolong next to Summer Rose on a hill that overlooked the city. At sunset, both Ruby and Yang had no more tears to cry. The two sisters held hands tightly as they watched their father be delivered to his final resting place. A gust of wind, and just like that, the sisters were alone, and this time, Weiss didn't know how to fix it. That night, Blake and Weiss begged their parents to let them stay over the sisters' place, and it was much too quiet. There were no sounds of Mr. Xiaolong joking around with his daughters, there was no smell of wonderfully cooked food. The feeling of warmth she felt every time she stayed over was gone so quickly. It was past 1 in the morning and Weiss still couldn't sleep. The person she lay beside earlier was gone, so she stood up and followed. The creaking of the door was too loud for the once joyful household. The dark hallway felt suffocating. She took a peek at the door across Ruby's and found two figures tightly holding each other. Yang whimpering, quiet Hicks and Blake hugging the blonde girl tighter every second. Everything to lessen all the pain they felt. She quietly closed the door and headed downstairs. The only light was from the moonlight outside. The man, Crow, had a loose flask on his hand, eyes shut tightly as if he was fighting from so many nightmares. Then she heard groaning metal and she knew where her Rose was. She walks through the back door and illuminated by the moonlight was Ruby Rose sitting limply on the metal swing that they once had so many hours of fun in. Feet fidgeting, pushing the girl every so often because of the action. She walked closer but when she stepped on twig, Ruby's head turned to her so fast in surprise. "Oh, hey Weiss," Ruby forced a smile, her heart twinged to see the once cheery disposition be replaced by something so broken. "Sorry I didn't say anything. I just couldn't sleep. I didn't want to bother you." Wordlessly, she walked toward the younger girl until she stood in front of her, then she pulled Ruby's head closer until she was hugging her tightly. Immediately, she felt wetness on her shirt, Ruby embracing her back as she broke down once more. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Even after Ruby had stopped she didn't let go. Morning came and they fell asleep on each other, Ruby's head laying on Weiss' shoulder, and Weiss placing her head on top of Ruby's. Hands intertwined, they slept underneath the tree, covered by sadness, bathed in moonlight and welcoming the beginning of a new tomorrow. Uncle Crow says we're leaving soon, Yang says nonchalantly, or at least trying to be as carefree in her tone as always, "'cause you know he can't leave us behind and his job is pretty, out there. He's always moving around places due to his job, sometimes we can't even contact him," Ruby continues, absent-mindedly, "that's partially why he didn't want any attachments but now he has no choice," was left unsaid. "Guess you guys'll be missing us a lot huh?" Yang says, grinning but the tightness around her eyes, they knew it was a facade. It was Blake who broke their silence, she grabs Yang's hand and gives it a tight squeeze, "Then we'll just have to pack so much fun in the next couple of months before you leave, so much fun that we wouldn't miss you." And the next few weeks passed by so quickly that every day she dreaded the upcoming and inevitable day the two were going to leave. Having fun and packing so many memories they could all go back to one day, if they'd ever see each other again. She cried on her mother's lap the night before the final day and she just steeled her resolve, grabbing her most important item. Weiss knew just what she was going to do with it. It was late in the evening when the final vehicle took the sisters' stuff. Their families were there as they said their goodbyes. Gyra and Kali hugged the sisters, alongside her own family, her mother and Winter giving them tight hugs saying they'd always be welcome in the Schnee household. Then came the actual goodbye, all of them were left teary-eyed. Blake had given Yang her favorite book and Yang had given the black-haired girl her favorite stuffed bear. Ruby on the other hand, gave her knitted blanket, the one made by her mom to Weiss. It was small, black with a red rose in the center. It was important to Ruby and Weiss had something of equal value. "Ruby, close your eyes," as the young girl obliged. Weiss walked behind the girl and placed the necklace around Ruby's neck. "Okay, you can open them now." She would never forget the sheer look of wonder Ruby had as she stared at the silver necklace with an intricate snowflake as a pendant. "This was given to me by my grandfather before he passed. He was my hero and every time I wore this it felt like he always there. Now I want to give it to you. I can't accept this, Weiss. This is special to you." Ruby carefully caressed the pendant, giving it with so much care. Weiss knew she made the right choice. "You're special to me too and I want this to be proof that no matter where you are, I'm there with you." Yang then grabs Blake and envelopes them in a group hug, teary eyes and gleeful laughter surrounding them. "We'll always be friends, right?" Ruby asks as they all huddle together. "Well, we'll always be a team." Yang grins, "We gotta have a team name though." "I have an idea for a team name," Blake smiles, pulling out a piece of paper. She writes all their initials and forms a very fitting alias. "Team Ruby, huh, I would have personally loved Team Weiss but," Weiss jokingly chuckles, "but this isn't too bad. Henceforth, Team Ruby is born. And this isn't." Their pseudo-meeting was interrupted by Uncle Crow giving the final warning for farewell. Ruby and Yang each give Weiss and Blake separate tight hugs before piling together. "We'll see each other again." "That's a promise," Ruby says with full resolution. Yeah, they'd see each other again. It was an oath. Yang left first. Knowing her, she didn't want them to see her tears falling down. The blonde had always tried to act tough around them, fearless. They knew the real Yang though, for as infuriating she was one of the kindest people she knew. RWBY on the other hand, kept her feet planted. Weiss approached the younger girl and gave her a firm squeeze on her shoulder for reassurance. RWBY turns around to face her, lips pursed, head held high. "I never break promises," she starts, "so I know one day I'd see you again, but until then. I hope this'll have to do. Vichnalikia samajandweni margronyupi hopejatatathisagain." She said so fast Weiss didn't know what was happening until RWBY grabbed her shoulders, took a deep breath. With puffed cheeks she pulled Weiss closer and placed a firm kiss on her lips. It was only a split second, but the split second their lips touched didn't register in her head until much later. 2 blinks she was staring at RWBY's red face. "I won't say goodbye cause I'll see you again, so instead I'll say, I love you Weisshni. See you later." With a sprint RWBY was inside the car in a flash, leaving her absent-mindedly waving her hand. Once she couldn't see the car she covered her face with her hands in embarrassment. "Well, they're gone," Blake says wistfully, but Weiss was just catching up to what happened. "She kissed me," Weiss says in awe. "She kissed me. I hope you know I'll never let this go, Shni. I'm going to be teasing you about this until the next time we see them." Blake smiles, shaking her out of her surprised stupor. "She kissed me, Blake. And? You think Yang didn't kiss me too?" the black-haired girl says nonchalantly. "We been there too, you know, just small pecks, but you and RWBY were just too busy to notice." "Wait, what?" True to Blake's word, she's been teased about this for 8 years and counting. Chapter 2, Secrets and Lost Innocence. It was 7 years since they left with their Uncle Crow, 7 years since they said byes to Blake and Weiss. 7 years since they were uprooted from everything they knew. Replaced with, well, new things. Some awful and some really cool things, and they finally knew who exactly their parents were. And who they both had to be. How did they get here, exactly? Well, let's have a recap, shall we? It was the first few weeks after they left when they found themselves in the middle of Brazil due to Uncle Crow's job. Which, up until this moment, they still didn't know what exactly it was. They were told to only bring a backpack worth of essentials, and she knew better than to disagree. RWBY didn't know where Uncle Crow sent the rest of the stuff from the house, but she was too busy thinking of Weiss, Blake, and everything they left behind. "Ugh, I'm bored." Yang groans, throwing a ball up and catching it simultaneously. "This is like the 5th day he's left us here in this house, Rubes." RWBY just nodded along, focusing on the game she had in her hands. She understood Yang's plight, but for the past 5 days, every single time their uncle would come home, he'd be dead beat, literally just placing the takeout on the table for them to eat before passing out on the couch or the floor. She'd get closer, taking small whiffs to know if he'd been drinking out or something, but no, instead she'd get hit by the smell of something burnt and metallic that seemed to cling to his skin. Before he leaves in the morning, the one thing he tells them is to never go out of the house and makes them promise it word for word. With that serious look on his face and the fact that she was sure she saw a gun holster in his jacket once, she knew not to argue. Whatever Uncle Crow's job was, it wasn't something kids like them should be messing with. "What do you think he does out there?" Yang asks her, and RWBY debated if she'd tell her sister about the weapons or their uncle smelling burnt, but before she could come up with a decision, the door swung open and their Uncle Crow walks in, quickly locking the door. He turns to them, giving them a tired smile, and ruffles their hair before placing takeout on the table and passing out, face first on the couch. RWBY and Yang shared a look of worry before walking to the table with as little noise as possible. As they ate, mouths kept quiet, but the way their eyes moved around, they were having a whole new level of sibling communication. "See? It's weird. He's always tired and he never tells us stuff." Yang grits her teeth in frustration, sending RWBY the point. RWBY rolled her eyes and pointed at their uncle. "Have you considered that maybe it's for our safety?" Yang's eyes widened before staring at their uncle suspiciously. What if Uncle Crow isn't as clean as we thought? What if he's a bad dude? Kman, hardly ever seeing us? Only showing up to take us after Mom and Dad died." RWBY raised a brow and stared at the man on the couch. After careful deliberation, she just shook her head. "Uncle Crow might be a weirdo, but I don't think he's a bad dude. I do think that he's hiding something from us, so." That needed no further explanation. Yang and RWBY nodded their heads and got themselves ready for what's to come. Usually Yang would be passed out way before 10 in the evening even came, but since they've arrived here, she had nothing to do but watch daytime soap operas she didn't understand and laze around the empty shack their uncle called a temporary home, making her energy levels at an all-time high. The place was empty when they had arrived. All there was a very dusty bunk bed, a dusty couch and a dusty kitchen. End point, everything was dusty and it badly triggered her sinuses. There was a really old TV there too, it worked but not as well as she'd like. She didn't think that thing ran in 480p. Needless to say, she was downright bored. She was bored, she missed Blake, Weiss, and everyone else back home. Honestly, she didn't know how RWBY was even managing considering she was usually a lot worse when it came to these things. So when the opportunity arose, they had a consensus that they would wait for Uncle Crow to leave before snooping around. And like clockwork, the dude actually got up at 3 in the morning, gave their pretending to be asleep heads a forward kiss before heading out. When they heard the click of a lock and the sound of an engine getting further and further away, Yang kicked the blanket off of her and jumped down from the top bunk. With determined looks, they set their sights on everything this room shack had to offer. But like the initial assessment, all they found were dusty furniture and allergies. Ack, this is hopeless, stomps, pacing around the floor, creaking of the wood beneath getting louder and quieter in a pace-like rhythm. Yang, wait, RWBY says before eyeing the floor with curiosity, pace again, around this area. Quiet creaking, loud creaking then going back to quiet creaking. RWBY and Yang share a look before kneeling down and placing their ears on the floor. Waves, ocean waves, a brief breeze seeping into the room through the floor. It's a draft, RWBY mutters. Yang shakes her head and grins, it's more than a draft, Rubes. It's a door. Jumping up and running to the sink, grabbing a wet rag from the kitchen, she bent down and wiped all the little crevices that were covered in dust, and the moment they wiped it thoroughly they found a clear, distinct shape of square, just big enough to fit a grown man vertically. Okay, a small passageway, that's something, RWBY nods, but how do we open it? Inspecting it further, they found a tiny hole, barely the size of a peppercorn. They couldn't help but frown. Is that supposed to be a keyhole? 'Cause it's freakin' small, Yang sighs, we won't be able to pick through that. Not exactly, Blake once taught me this. RWBY digs down her pocket and she finds a very thin metal needle, bending the tip, it formed a small hook just big enough to fit through the very tiny hole. I think this is just a single lock mechanism, so I just need to. She begins poking through the inside, tongue sticking out in concentration. When they heard a small click, the little door opened up and they grinned at the much bigger space below. Alright, I'll head down there first to make sure it's safe, Yang says, holding onto the upper floor, before jumping down to make sure the drop wasn't too high. The moment she dropped, her senses were overtaken by the smell of salty water and dust, sending her into a sneezing frenzy. It took a while before her nose calmed down and longer for her eyes to adjust in the dark. Yang squinted, walking around the newly discovered room until she felt a wall and what looked like a light switch. Without thinking about it, she hits the switch and slowly the humming of lights coming alive could be heard. The sudden brightness makes her recoil, her vision blurs before refocusing again. The change was like night and day. Hey Rubes, come check this out. She sees her sister's head taking a peek from the top and an excited gasp before dropping down and spreading more dust around the area. Ugh, be careful RWBY. Whoa, this is so cool, and RWBY was right, compared to the empty wooden furniture above, this place was like a decked out superhero base. The metal tables filled end to end with stuff they didn't even know. One wall was lined with backpacks that seemed to be stuffed with, or at least hopefully stuffed, supplies, and the other side made them gulp. It was filled top to bottom with guns and various weaponry. They decided it was best to leave that segment and focus somewhere else. In the center of the room was a single pedestal, a picture frame with a photo of 4 people. From the left, was someone they were familiar with. With black hair and red tips, an amused smile, it was their mom, Summer Rose. Next to her was another woman, mid-laugh, someone they didn't recognize, long, messy black hair and pale red eyes, a jovial expression as if she heard the most hilarious joke ever. Next to the pair was their dad and Uncle Crow, in the middle of rough housing. Crow had one arm around Taeyang's shoulder while the other gave a peace sign. Dad on the other hand was pushing Uncle Crow's face away with one hand and a similar peace sign. They all looked so young. So hopeful, so happy. I miss them, Mom and Dad, RWBY says, tone tinged with melancholy. She just slung an arm around her sister to pull her closer into a side hug. Picking up the frame, she wondered if they should take the photo as a souvenir and ask their uncle about the woman with the long black hair. As she turned it around there was a note taped to the back. It said, to Team STRQ. That made Ruby and Yang's brow raise. For saving the world again and again, I'll approve of your vacation terms. Enjoy your paid leaves and the wonderful beach sun. All the best, Ajban, and on it was a wax seal with the words the World Protection Order. I thought, you know, since we've got all these gadgets and literally a wall full of guns, our family was filled with a bunch of mercenaries, but Yang trails as lets a finger run through the seal. The World Protection Order, Ruby mumbles, deep in thought, is our family just a bunch of super secret spies? Is that why we're here? 'Cause Uncle Crow's undercover. I don't know, Rubes, Yang sighs, but I'm gonna throw a fit if they are and we were excluded from these fun events. Yang places the picture frame before to its proper place before turning to the rest of the room. Now what? The blonde spoke up, I have more questions than answers. Well, we're not getting anywhere by sitting here, wanna look around some more? Let's go pack some of those bags up too. Ruby says, and that's what they did. Yang scoured, drawer after drawer, one was literally filled with different currencies from different countries. Immediately she stuffed all of them in a backpack. One drawer was filled with these weird packets with fast food chain logos in front. Unable to quell her inquisitiveness, she flipped the back and read out loud. Place in the particle microwave and press start, enjoy a hot meal with McDonald's. Yang turns around and spots an appliance that looks like a microwave. With a shrug of her shoulders, she ripped the plastic off and placed the little packet inside. Pressing start, the thing literally started setting sparks, before erupting in a smoky explosion. For a moment Yang got worried, but as the microwave door swung up, she was left with a perfect serving of large fries, 2 Big Macs and soda. Hey Rubes, food, she said excitedly, but her little sister was in a world of her own. Yo Yang. Take a look at these, she waves her wrist around and Yang notices the metal band around them. The bottom half having this weird protruded nozzle, you think they're just like Spider-Man's web shooters. Yang playfully rolls her eyes and watches her sister's antics further. Oddly enough, Ruby was right, it was somewhat like shooters owned by the web-slinging hero from New York, except these shoot out a strong but thin metal wire with a little grappling device at the end. How'd they find out, you ask? As soon as Ruby stretched her arm, the little nozzle shot out a wire and grabbed the ceiling. Immediately as the device firmly held it, it retracted and pulled her sister up along until her wrist touched the top. Not web shooters, Rubes, I think those are grappling hooks, she says in awe, stuffing a fry in her mouth. This is the coolest. Ruby grins looking down, the coolness meter, however, drops when they realize a flaw in their shenanigans, so, how do I get down? And this is why we don't touch stuff until we know what it does. I don't want to hear that from you, Yang. Where'd you get the food anyway? Why don't you figure out a way to get down first and then I'll show you where I got this? Yang teased her sister, who was desperately trying to get free. Surprisingly, she managed to hang perfectly with her 2 feet gripping the ceiling itself. Ruby pulled as hard as she could, only then did she notice a small red button right beneath the nozzle. I think I found out how. Ruby exclaims right before hitting the button. It was too late when she realized what she'd done. The hook immediately retracted and without anywhere to hold but the smooth surface of the ceiling, Ruby fell down on the floor, back first with a thud. Whoa. Ruby. You alright? Yang winced, bending down and helped her sister up, rubbing the spot on her back where she landed. Are you okay? Are you concussed? That was awesome. Ruby shot up and stretched her wrist again, aiming for the ceiling again, the wire shooting out and pulling her up once more. Only this time, when the hook went back, her sister was ready, falling down with a thump, her feet placed on the floor and knees braced for impact. I'm taking these. Ruby's eyes shining as she fiddles with the wrist grappling hooks. Yang sighs exasperatedly before chuckling at her antics. Come on, geek, here, eat first. They found themselves on the floor, eating another batch of particle microwave food, only this time it was Burger King. They had a bunch of different gadgets laid in front of them, both taking their time to fiddle. You know, this is straight out of a comic book. First, we become pseudo-orphans, our only living relative is a mysterious uncle, next we find out our parents were secret agents. Yang munches on the Whopper before inspecting a pair of yellow half-gauntlets, finger gliding across the engraved letters, Power Gauntlets it read. She just shrugged her shoulders and tossed the item back to the floor. What next? Her sister, however, had a different question. What do you think Weiss and Blake are doing right now? I miss them so much, RWBY asks out loud, but one hand fiddling with the snowflake necklace the white-haired girl had given her. Her eyes remained focused on the plastic container that had what seemed to be gumballs in them. Dunno. I miss them too, but they'd be a lot safer if they didn't know. Can't be doing worse than us, right? Yang gets closer to RWBY and grabs one of the gumballs and pops it in her mouth. RWBY stares at her in open-mouth horror and Yang raises a brow in inquiry. What? She questions, chewing the strawberry-flavored candy. RWBY didn't utter a word and just passed the container to her. She read it aloud, made by Pietro Tech, Para. Her eyes whips up and stares at RWBY in fear, paralyzing gumballs. She wanted to spit it out, but instead, she kept chewing. We don't touch stuff we don't know, RWBY says mockingly. Do you feel? I don't know, paralyzed. The more Yang kept chewing, the more she realized she was still moving the same way. I think I've come to a conclusion, these paralyze other people and not me. Picking up the container and turning it around. Oh, thank God, she sighs, reading the instructions. Simply chew, and once the layer of sugar flavoring has been broken down, stick on the back of the neck of desired target. That's unsanitary, but hopefully effective. I guess I can chew them too. And RWBY popped a piece of gum in her mouth. Oh. Strawberry. Has anyone told you, you're way too chill and accepting of these circumstances? They continued trying out the different items in front of them. One was a stylish pen that when you clicked, a floor-melting acid dripped out of the tip. They quickly put that away for their own safety. Another was a tiny, golden signet ring. The top was a tiny knob, and when RWBY turned it, it started crackling electricity. She turned it off immediately. Another was a lighter that was heavy to hold. When they opened it up with a flip, the moment it started beeping, RWBY grabbed it from Yang's hand and closed it. Reading the inscription outside, it said, Pietro Tech, hand grenade. Grenade. Needless to say, they quickly put it back. Not wanting to get mauled, maimed, or exploded by the various items around, they put everything properly in the different backpacks around, labeling them to not get lost. When they've successfully inspected and kept most, they had 5 backpacks worth of stuff lined up on the side. They now turned their attention to the one wall they deliberately left untouched earlier. So, wanna do the honors of being the first one to get a gun off the wall? RWBY asks, gulping. Maybe later. Yang looks at RWBY before turning around and looking at the place some more. Back at the pedestal, she took another look at the picture frame, sighing as she placed the picture face down. Immediately, a click could be heard and it turned around. Instead of the frame, however, it was a thin stand, and at the top, look. Car keys, and as soon as Yang took it, the inner part of the pedestal flipped again and on top was the picture frame once more. There's a garage here? RWBY asks questioningly. They shared a look and Yang did the only logical thing to do, she pressed the bottom button on the key. At once, the entire room was shaking. She grabbed RWBY and pulled her closer and they both screamed as the room started opening up in the middle. Closing their eyes, they waited for something bad to happen, but sooner, the shaking and groaning had stopped, and instead of the dusty floor they'd been sitting on earlier, was a wide open hole that was directly connected to the cool waters of Brazil's beach. Dude, it's not a car. Inside the inner water hole was a smooth-looking vehicle that was placed underwater. Pressing the top bottom of the keys, the roof opened and RWBY jumped inside in awe. Yang followed and landed on the metal flooring with a clank. Yang, it's a cab marine. You know, you should really leave the puns to me, little sister. I'll let it slide this time just cause it's really cool. She could already see RWBY's eyes roll in exasperation. When they sat down in the first 2 seats, everything came to life. A robotic voice speaks up. Welcome, Team STRQ, password required. Password. Now what? RWBY questions as she blows a bubble from the gum earlier. Password. Summer Rose. Yang says, but the screen in front of them only beeped and flashed red, so that's not right. Password, ER. Taeyang Xiao Long. Beep, then a flash of red. Password Crow Branwen, another beep and a flash of red, and they slumped on their seats. You think it's that other lady? The one with the long messy black hair, Yang asked her sister, but RWBY just shook her head. The one that looks like you? Even if it was her, we don't even know her name, RWBY replies. They both sigh and stare at the ceiling of the cab marine, as RWBY lovingly put it, I can't believe they kept this all from us. How'd we never find out before this? You think Mom and Dad got Got killed? Remember when we got news that Mom DD died? The man who delivered the news didn't look like a doctor, cause I saw him, you know. He said it was a car crash and that they couldn't recover the body, but RWBY starts, but there was something weird about him. Dad tensed up, but I think he knew exactly who he was and what happened. Mom said it was going to be a simple business trip, but it was probably this, a mission, and she died during a mission. Yang. Damn it. Yang couldn't stop her mind from running, so many thoughts, so many secrets to uncover. It felt like they weren't even touching the tip of the iceberg when it came to family secrets. Also, I have another question. How is Uncle Crow? Well, Uncle. RWBY whispers quietly. Well, of course he'd be, but the more Yang thought of an answer, the more she found herself empty-handed. Uncle Crow wasn't Mom's brother, nor Dad's brother, maybe that lady with the long black hair, they sorta look alike. Ugh, I wish someone would at least explain things to us, you know? Instead everyone left and we're stuck with a puzzle with so many missing pieces, her sister groaned. Yang shoved the keys in her pockets. They weren't getting anywhere with this, so they just showed their way out the underwater vehicle. Things escalated much too quickly from there on. The moment they emerged from the cab marine, they heard something unfamiliar. They'd probably only been here a couple of hours, so it was too early for Uncle Crow to be back, and by the multiple footsteps they heard, something told them that Uncle Crow didn't come here willingly. Yang's eye darted toward the ceiling where they came through. RWBY nodded. Aiming at the spot beside the entryway, she let the grappling hook take her up and she slowly closed it until they heard another click. She slowly let herself down and looked at her older sister. Yang placed her pointer finger on her lips, then non-verbally told RWBY to take a deep breath to calm down. Yang gave her hands 2 squeezes. 1. Breathe in. 2. Breathe out. What do we do? RWBY asked in a whisper, voice desperately trying to stay even. We need to find a way out, Yang answers back. The backpacks, help me load it in the sub. With resolute gazes they carefully dropped the backpacks inside the vehicle. Once all of it was in, Yang placed the yellow gauntlets she'd been fiddling with earlier on her hands and it latched itself automatically, a perfect fit. Now what? That was the question, wasn't it? RWBY looked at her to tell her what to do, but Yang didn't know either. She was just a slightly older kid that was led here due to bizarre circumstances. Their parents were dead. Now, if RWBY's conjecture was alright, about their mysterious uncle being here on a mission, then he'd be dead too and they'd soon follow. Voices erupted above. Yang and RWBY flinched. Who else is here with you? An angry voice screamed. It was a man. Who's your backup? The next voice sounded like they'd been through hell and back, gasping as if every breath was his last. They immediately knew who it was. I already told you. I came here alone. Then there were sounds of punches being thrown. They at least knew who was being punched to death. Yang grabbed RWBY, covering her sister's ears, sheltering the younger girl from the horrible violence that lay just above them. Search the place, the angry man called out, and kill everyone else. Multiple footsteps echoed from above, but she couldn't move her legs. All the bad scenarios flashing before her eyes. Yang. RWBY squeezed her hand and she snapped out of it. We gotta help Uncle Crow. Hey boss. There's a passageway here. She wasn't supposed to cuss, but shit. They scamper around the room, Yang heading to the wall with the weapons and grabs a gun for herself and tosses another to RWBY, before dashing to turn off the light. RWBY and her both hiding behind the 2 metal tables. The sounds of wood breaking made flinch, but they both tried their best to keep quiet and even breath. It wasn't long before they'd heard a thud of heavy footprints just a few feet away from them. Listening intently to where the footsteps were, they closed their eyes as the lights came back on. Hey boss. This place got a sub. Man 1 said in excitement, but everything's been stripped away except for the guns. With each thud of someone going through the ceiling doorway, Yang counted. Thud. 2. Thud, thud. 4. Thud, thud. 6 and one last thud, but the last one was accompanied by pained groans. So. 6 enemies, all grown men versus 2 kids, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, equipped with weapons but not the knowledge on how to use them, and a half-dead man, currently held hostage by the said 6 enemies. Well, their odds were just wonderful. Looks like whoever you trusted didn't bother waiting for you, the boss you said. Well, no matter, we'll just be taking everything. Yang hears the cocking of a gun, her eyes widened. Any last words, Agent Branwen? In the corner of her eyes, she saw her sister slowly standing up, but she was too late to stop it. Ruby didn't know what death felt like. But she knew the concept of loss all too well. Her mother was gone, her father faced the same fate. The moment the man said last words, there was something in her head that just snapped. She lost her mom. She lost her dad. Now her uncle was next. Yang would follow and they'd kill her last. That's why it felt weird, she felt calm. Like this was just an ordinary occurrence in her day-to-day life. Her hands weren't shaking, her thoughts were clear. It was almost like, being reborn, was that the term? Before it registered in her mind, she already stood up. Everything felt like it was running in slow mo. Her veins pumped like it always had, like she was meant to be here, at this very moment. She was born to be here. Ruby came into the conclusion that loss was hard, but death came so easily. It was just a matter of finding out whose death was next. Her mind fell into a rhythm. Ruby raised the handgun, she exhaled the breath she didn't know she was holding. She aimed and pulled the trigger. The next thing she saw was red, like rose petals flying amidst the wind. Thank you all so much for coming to listen. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to check out one of the other playlists on the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Ciao for now, lovelies.